A puppy had 30 seconds before being put down when a tiny kitten leapt into his cage and changed everything. What was supposed to be his last moment turned into the beginning of a fight no one saw coming. Because this wasn't just about saving a puppy. It was about exposing secrets someone powerful never wanted the world to know. Your presence here is powerful. In a world full of noise, it's the quiet gestures of compassion that truly stand out. If your heart still makes room for kindness, you're already one of us. Paraphrased. First paragraph. Same length, meaning structure. A puppy had just 30 seconds left before euthanasia when a tiny kitten slipped into his kennel and changed everything. What should have been his final moment became the start of a struggle nobody could have predicted. This story wasn't simply about saving a puppy. It was about revealing secrets a powerful figure never wanted revealed. As time ran out, a volunteer faced a choice no one should ever have to make. Risk everything to save two innocent souls, or step away and let them disappear forever. What she didn't realize was that these animals were holding a secret so astonishing it could ruin the man in charge of the shelter. Now danger is drawing nearer, and making it through will require loyalty, courage, and one unforgettable act of rebellion. What secret ties this kitten to the very man determined to see them gone? How far would you go to save a life with only seconds to spare? Your presence here has real impact. In a world full of distractions, it's the small acts of kindness that truly shine. If you still find space in your heart for compassion, you belong here with us. Original second paragraph. The fluorescent lights buzzed harshly overhead in the Kentucky rural animal shelter, casting a sickly glow across the cold concrete floor. The morning air held a sharp antiseptic smell that couldn't quite mask the underlying sense of fear and despair. In the last cage of the long row, a small reddish-brown puppy pressed himself against the back wall, his thin frame trembling. Rusty, as the shelter staff had named him, was barely 6 months old. His patchy fur revealed the neglect he'd endured, and his wide brown eyes darted nervously between the faces that passed his cage. Above his kennel hung a bright red tag that seemed to glow like a stoplight in the harsh fluorescent lighting. On it, 2 simple words spelled out his fate. 30 seconds. Paraphrased second paragraph. Same length, meaning structure. Fluorescent lights hummed sharply above the rural Kentucky animal shelter, their cold glow spreading across the bare concrete floor. The morning air was tinged with antiseptic, yet underneath, there was a constant sense of worry and hopelessness. At the far end of the row, a small reddish-brown puppy hugged the back of his cage, his body shaking with fear. The shelter staff had named him Rusty. He was hardly 6 months old. His patchy fur showed the hardships he'd been through, and his big brown eyes flickered with anxiety as people walked by. Hanging over his kennel was a bright red tag, shining like a warning in the bright lights. On it, 2 plain words spelled out what was coming. 30 seconds. Original third paragraph. The shelter worker approached with practiced efficiency, her footsteps echoing in the quiet morning. Her face was carefully blank as she prepared the syringe. The routine so familiar, she could have done it with her eyes closed. This was just another Tuesday morning, just another unwanted animal, just another necessary task. A few feet away, Mary Ann Holloway stood with her hands clenched at her sides. Her worn work clothes and tired eyes made her blend into the background of the shelter, just as she had for the past year as a volunteer. But today, something inside her was screaming. She watched the worker approach Rusty's cage, feeling helpless against the machinery of the system she'd begun to question more and more. "Wait," Mary Ann whispered, though she knew it wouldn't make a difference. The word caught in her throat, too quiet to even reach the worker's ears. The metallic click of the cage door opening seemed unnaturally loud. Rusty pressed himself even harder against the wall, making himself as small as possible. His whole body shook. but he didn't make a sound, as if he knew that crying out wouldn't change anything. That's when it happened. In the cage next door, a small gray tabby kitten had been watching everything with sharp green eyes. As the worker reached for Rusty, the kitten, known as Willow, suddenly sprang into action. Her tiny paws worked furiously at the bars separating the cages, finding the small gap where the metal had worn away. "Hey!" the shelter worker called. Out, startled, as Willow squeezed through the gap with determined flexibility. Before anyone could react, the kitten had leapt into Rusty's cage. Instead of attacking or hiding, Willow did something that made everyone in the room freeze. She walked right up to the trembling puppy and pressed her small body against his, purring loud enough to be heard across the room. Rusty's reaction was immediate and stunning. His trembling slowed, then stopped. His frightened eyes softened as he looked down at the tiny kitten, who had chosen to comfort him in what should have been his final moments. Slowly, carefully, he lowered his head to rest it gently against Willow's gray fur. The shelter worker stood with the syringe still, in her hand, mouth slightly open. "I've never," she started, then stopped, shaking her head in disbelief. Marianne stepped forward, finding her voice at last. "Look at them," she said, her quiet words carrying a strength she didn't know she possessed. "Just look." The scene before. Them defied everything they thought they knew about cats and dogs, about natural enemies, about the cold realities of shelter life. Willow had curled herself around Rusty's neck like a living collar, her purring growing louder as the puppy relaxed against her. They were two unwanted creatures finding comfort in each other, challenging the very system that had condemned them. For Marianne, the moment crystallized everything she'd been feeling but hadn't dared to voice, every questionable practice she'd witnessed, every decision that had seemed too harsh, too quick, too final. It all came together in the tableau before her. This wasn't just about a cat and a dog. This was about challenging what everyone had accepted as necessary and normal. The worker lowered the syringe, her professional detachment cracking. "I've worked here for 8 years," she said slowly, "and I've never seen anything like this." Other shelter staff had gathered now, drawn by the commotion. They stood in a loose circle around the cage, watching as Willow groomed Rusty's ear with gentle determination, while the puppy's tail gave a tentative wag, his first since arriving at the shelter. "We can't," Moran said, her voice stronger now. "We just can't." Everyone knew what she meant. The red tag above the cage seemed to mock them all now, its brutal simplicity challenged by the complex reality of what they were witnessing. Willow had done more than just interrupt a routine euthanasia. She had forced them all to see the individual lives behind the statistics, the beating hearts behind the paperwork. The shelter director, attracted by the unusual gathering, pushed through the small crowd. "What's the holdup? We have a schedule to keep." But even as she spoke, Willow raised her head and fixed the director with a steady, green-eyed stare, while Rusty pressed closer to his unexpected protector. The kittens' purring never faltered, filling the sterile space with the sound of unconditional love and defiance. The morning light had begun to streak through the high windows, casting golden bars across the cage floor. In that light, Rusty's reddish-brown fur glowed warmly, and Willow's gray coat turned silver. They looked transformed, no longer unwanted. Strays, but beings worthy of life, of love, of a chance. Moran felt something shift inside her, like a key turning in a lock. She had always been the quiet one. The one who followed rules. The one who tried to work within the system, even when it hurt. But watching Willow and Rusty, seeing how one small act of courage could change everything, she knew she couldn't stay quiet anymore. The red tag hung above them like a judgment, but its power had been broken by the simplest of things: compassion, connection, and the courage to defy expectations. In that moment, as morning light filled the shelter, and two unlikely friends huddled together in defiance of their fate, everything changed. The chain of events that would challenge the entire system had begun with a tiny leap of faith from a brave gray kitten who refused to let death have the final word. Paraphrased third paragraph, identical length structure. The shelter worker approached with routine efficiency, her steps echoing in the quiet morning air. Her expression was carefully neutral as she got the syringe. Ready. The process was so practiced, she could nearly do it blindfolded. It was simply another Tuesday, just another unwanted animal, another job on the list. Just a short distance away, Marianne Holloway stood, her hands tightly clenched. Her old work clothes and weary eyes helped her fade into the background, just as she'd done all year volunteering. But today, something inside her was shouting. She watched the worker near Rusty's cage, feeling powerless against the machine of the system she was increasingly doubting. "Wait," Marianne managed, even though she knew it likely wouldn't matter. The words stuck in her throat, too soft to reach the worker's ears. The metallic sound of the cage door opening was almost painfully loud. Rusty shrank even further back, making himself tiny. His whole body shook, but he didn't cry out, as if he'd learned it wouldn't change anything. That's when everything shifted. In the cage beside his, a small gray tabby kitten with keen green eyes had been watching closely. As the worker reached for Rusty, the kitten, named Willow, sprang into action. Her tiny paws worked quickly, at the bars, finding a worn spot where the metal had weakened. "Hey," called the worker, surprised, as Willow squeezed through the gap with determination. Before anyone could stop her, she had leaped into Rusty's cage. Instead of running or scratching, Willow did something that made everyone pause. She went right up to the trembling puppy and pressed against him, purring loud enough for all to hear. Rusty's reaction was quick and remarkable. His shaking slowed and then stopped. His scared eyes softened as he looked at the kitten comforting him during what should have been his last moments. Gently, he lowered his head onto Willow's gray fur. The shelter worker hesitated, syringe in hand, speechless. "I've never..." she started, but stopped, shaking her head in amazement. Marianne stepped up, her voice finally strong. "Look at them," she said, her quiet tone holding unexpected strength. "Just look." What they saw went against everything. They thought about cats and dogs, about rivals, about shelter life's harsh rules. Willow curled herself around Rusty's neck like a scarf, purring louder as the puppy calmed beside her. Here were two animals nobody wanted, now finding comfort together, pushing back against a system that condemned them. For Marianne, this moment brought together all her doubts, every tough call, every harsh judgment. It all merged here. This wasn't just a cat and a dog. It was a challenge to what everyone had taken as normal. The worker slowly lowered the syringe, her professionalism breaking. 8 years I've been here, she said, voice low. I've never seen anything like this. Other shelter staff came over, drawn by the sight. They stood in a loose circle, watching Willow groom Rusty's ear while the puppy's tail gave a small, hopeful wag, the first since he arrived. We can't, Marianne said, her voice firmer. We just can't. Everyone understood. The red tag now seemed almost absurd, its harsh message overpowered by what was truly happening. Willow had done more than pause a routine. She made them see the real lives behind the statistics, the hearts behind the forms. The director, curious about the group, came forward. What's the holdup? We're on a tight schedule. But even as she spoke, Willow looked up and met her gaze, while Rusty pressed close to his friend. The kitten's purring kept going, filling the air with the sound of affection and resistance. Morning sunlight started pouring in, leaving golden streaks across the cage floor. In that light, Rusty's fur looked warm and Willow's coat shone silver. They looked changed, no longer discarded strays. but animals worthy of life, of care, of a chance. Marianne felt a shift inside, as if a door was unlocking. She had always followed the rules, trying to help within the system, even when it hurt. But seeing Willow and Rusty, and how a small act of courage could change everything, she realized she couldn't stay silent. The red tag hung over them like a verdict, but its control was ended by simple compassion, connection, and the courage to break the pattern. In that morning light, as two unlikely friends pressed together in defiance of their fate, everything changed. The events that would shake the entire system started with a single leap of faith from a brave little kitten who refused to let death have the last word. If you want the next 3 paragraphs, reply next 3. If you want to adjust style or length, let me know.